Well, joining me to discuss this is the Israeli-American journalist Emily Schrader, the Israeli-American activist and author Miko Peled, and the Palestinian commentator Omar Badr. Well, welcome to all of you. Start with you, Emily. A lot of people around the world imploring Israel to have some kind of ceasefire, not least to get the hostages out, but also to stop the relentless killing of innocent Palestinians, women, children, and so on. But Netanyahu absolutely adamant tonight, no deal, no ceasefire. We will go on until Hamas are completely finished. What is your reaction to this?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on this important topic tonight. I think the way that even the sentiment was phrased, that it's Israel rejecting ceasefire, isn't quite accurate. You know, when it comes to what the situation is on the ground. Israel has been willing to accept multiple ceasefires in the past, as well as they have done temporary pauses in fighting. The reality is that we had a ceasefire on October 6th. It wasn't Israel who started this war, but it is Israel who will finish it. And you cannot invade the sovereign borders. We're not even talking about disputed territory. We're not talking about the West Bank, but the sovereign borders of the state of Israel, rape, murder, and maim innocent people, and then kidnap over 200 more and expect that you can dictate the terms of your own survival and staying in power in the Gaza Strip. This is just not the way it works, and Israel would actually be in violation of international law for doing so. Because Israel, as a state actor, has an obligation legally to restore a sense of security to the citizens of the state of Israel. And unfortunately, that cannot be done until Hamas is removed from power in the Gaza Strip.
Well, Mika, I can see you laughing there incredulously. Before you respond to that, I just want to inform viewers about what the Hamas proposed deal was, as seen by the Reuters news agency. Phase one, a 45-day pause in fighting, during which all Israeli women hostages, males under 19, the elderly and sick, would be exchanged for Palestinian women and children held in Israeli jails. Israeli forces would withdraw from populated areas of Gaza, and the reconstruction of hospitals and refugee camps would begin. Phase two, remaining male Israeli hostages would be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners, and Israeli forces would leave Gaza completely. Phase three, both sides would exchange remains and bodies, and Hamas is also calling for the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza going forward. Your response to Netanyahu saying no deal? Mika, I'm sorry. I think you're muting. You're on mute at the moment. If you wouldn't mind just unmuting yourself.
Sorry about that, yes.
You're back.
Well, it seems certainly that the Hamas proposal is reasonable, and Netanyahu, being a genocidal maniac who wants to continue the killing and the bloodshed, is not interested. I mean, I think we've seen that the last several months of his policies in Gaza have led to what can only be described as mass genocide. And since the entire world is standing with him and he's not facing any consequences seriously, there's no reason for him to stop. And so the question is, will the international community step in and force him to stop the killing, force him to accept the Hamas or the Palestinian proposals? And will the international community stand by the Palestinians who are now, like I said, presented the world and presented Israel with a very reasonable proposal for ceasefire? Having said that, I think the ceasefire is nowhere nearly enough. I think the entire international community needs to come in and declare a no-fly zone over Gaza and impose severe sanctions against the state of Israel, particularly now since it's obvious that the state of Israel is refusing even a very reasonable proposal by the Palestinians, by the Palestinian representatives in the Gaza Strip. So it seems very, very clear. The only question is, why is the international community not standing with the Palestinians and not helping the Palestinians to enforce at least this very reasonable proposal?
Okay, but to play devil's advocate here, Israel's position is that Hamas committed an appalling terror attack on October the 7th, killing over 1,200 people. Many of whom were innocent women and children, butchered in the most savage manner. And they have publicly stated since then, Hamas, that they will do the same thing again and again and again if they're able to. And at the moment, depending on which figures you look at least half the Hamas fighting force is still there and still fighting, representing to Israelis an existential threat to their very existence. So why should Netanyahu in that circumstance, allow half of Hamas to continue to exist and present that threat to his people?
Well, the question is why we're accepting the Israeli premise to this. Israel has been engaged in genocide and apartheid policies for 75 years. Palestinians have been living under a reign of terror, particularly in the Gaza Strip. This is not the first time that Israel massacres civilians by the thousands in the Gaza Strip. So why Palestinians are resisting and why Palestinian fighters came out of Gaza on October 7th and engaged in resistance is not the question.
Well, it's not resistance, is it? I mean,
what is resistant about raping and murdering and kidnapping innocent civilians?
Absolute resistance.
How is that resistance?
Hypocrisy.
Murdering children on the streets of Israel
right to talk
is
about killing
resistance to you?
children. Israel has no right to talk about murdering children.
Do you believe that Israel has a right to exist in the first place?
Israel has been massacring children.
Do you believe that Israel has a right to exist?
Hang on. Let me please. Let me interrupt because let me interrupt because the third. Let me please, with respect, Mr. Peled, let me interrupt to say one member of the panel hasn't spoken yet and has kept very quiet, respectfully, during that exchange between the two of you. Omar Badr. I mean, this cuts to the quick of the story, really. If you view what Hamas did on October the 7th as simply resistance, then to me you are ignoring the reality that it was an appalling terror attack. You can have absolutely legitimate concerns about the scale of Israel's response. I have them myself. But do you genuinely also believe that it was resistance, what happened that day?
I'll get to that in a minute, but I do have to respond first to the gall of somebody invoking the killing of children in light of Israel having killed nearly 12,000 Palestinian children buried under the rubble over the past 3 months in a genocidal scale in violence against defenseless children is utterly and completely absurd. And the second and equally important point to make is that anybody who tells you that there was a ceasefire on October 6th was lying to you. On October 6th, Palestinians had no freedom whatsoever throughout the Gaza Strip. They could not go in and out of Gaza, no airport, no seaport, no jobs, no access to the outside world, no functioning electricity. And Israel continued to steal Palestinian land in the West Bank throughout that entire year and for decades, frankly, even before that, and had killed nearly 250 Palestinians in the course of just the beginning of the year until October 6th. So people who call that a ceasefire are basically telling you to accept a status quo in which Palestinians can be murdered, they can have their children thrown in military detention indefinitely, in which Palestinian land can be taken away from them at will, and they can be denied freedom. And that's an acceptable status quo so long as Israelis are safe. There's a word for that kind of world, and that's called apartheid. That is the current status quo that always existed leading up to the violence that we saw on October 7th. Now, certainly, any time that you engage in violence against civilians, that is completely indefensible, and there's no way to excuse that. Nonetheless, thinking people look at the situation that led up to it and understand that imprisoning Palestinians by the millions for no crime other than being Palestinian in Gaza and denying them access to the outside world is essentially a recipe to create a wave of violence that is effectively inevitable. People who are serious about wanting to end violence and serious about producing a situation in which there is peace for both Israelis and Palestinians have to be concerned about the driving force of that violence. And the driving force is absolutely Israeli apartheid that has denied Palestinians freedom for too long. And until you solve that underlying problem, you're never going to get into a situation in which there is any safety or security for anyone.
You know, you continue using all these buzzwords, apartheid, genocide, and those aren't what those words actually mean. But I do want to clarify a few things that you commented on.
It's nice of you to dispute them, but Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the UN disagree with you.
I shouldn't be speaking about killing children. There is a massive difference between a defensive war targeting terrorist targets that are using civilian sites, including UN schools, including hospitals, endangering their own people in the Gaza Strip, something that they themselves have admitted, and the invading of the sovereign borders of a foreign country and murdering children in their home on a Jewish holiday.
All right, let me ask Emily a question.
Emily, that's not a defensive war.
Let me ask Emily. Let me ask. Excuse me. If you could stop shouting over each other. Let me ask Emily a question, and it's this: Emily, look, I think Israel had a right to defend itself, a duty to defend itself, but we now have, as we've heard, I think it's 12,000 children believed to have been killed. Another 20,000 or so have been orphaned. 2/3 of Gaza has been flattened. And here Benjamin Netanyahu says after 4 months, well, we're nowhere near finished. There's months more of this. We will continue until the last Hamas terrorist is gone. Okay, but that may mean the entire Gaza Strip is gone, destroyed, flattened. It may mean, well, hang on. It may mean the number of children killed doubles to 20,000, maybe 30,000. At what point does this become, even to people who support Israel implacably about this, does it become just utterly disproportionate?
Well, I think proportionality isn't the actual question here. There's a very easy way to end this war, and that is to return all of the hostages and to surrender unconditionally. That is what Hamas should be doing. That is where the focus and the pressure of the international community.
Hang on, but Emily, that
of
would
course
not.
It would.
That
those
would
are
no.
Israel's,
Benjamin
those are Israel's
Netanyahu.
true demands.
No, hang on. Benjamin Netanyahu has stated unequivocally this goes on until Hamas are finished, all of them. That means That means another 20,000 people have to be killed, right? Who are just the terrorists.
No.
So he's not going to stop if the hostages got released tomorrow.
But that's not true. I said
Netanyahu,
the unconditional,
Emily, let me finish.
Let me finish my question. Of Hamas.
I don't think Prime Minister Netanyahu has any intention, even if the hostages get returned tomorrow, of letting 20,000 Hamas terrorists remain in power in Gaza. He's going to continue.
But I already said that. I said the release of hostages and the unconditional surrender of Hamas. Hamas cannot remain in power in the Gaza Strip and have Israel restore a sense of security. Those two things cannot coexist. That is why Netanyahu said we will not accept any term in which Hamas stays in power, because they will do the same thing again. And the longer this goes on, the longer they stay in power, the more funding. I think the most recent document said 150 million went through Sinwar in the documents that the IDF found on the ground. The more money that Iran is funding,
but Emily, you cannot just
the stronger Hamas is.
You cannot just kill everybody in Gaza. You can't.
Israel is not intending to kill everyone in Gaza.
If they carry on for many more months,
we are risking.
They carry on for many more months. How many people are going to get killed?
No,
I can't answer that question as to how many people are going to be killed, but I can tell you that not a single, not even one more person would be killed if Hamas surrendered unconditionally today.
All right, I want to find. Listen, we have
to be killed.
Yes, can I suggest something?
Yes.
May I make a suggestion? Since Netanyahu and his government have, before October 7th, have already, and previous Israeli governments have murdered more civilians than Hamas ever did. Why don't we flip this equation and say that the hostages will be released once Netanyahu and his government are taken to The Hague and charged with war crimes? I think it makes much more sense. The Israelis have killed far more Palestinian children and Palestinian civilians than Hamas or any Palestinians ever have. Israeli attacks on Gaza preceded Hamas by decades. Israeli attacks in the West Bank go on. Israeli attacks in Jerusalem go on where Hamas is not in charge.
Okay.
So, I mean, this whole Hamas excuse is ridiculous.
Okay.
Why don't we do this?
Okay.
Let's wait till we remove Netanyahu's government and then negotiate. I think that should be the condition. And the Israeli military, which is a genocidal terrorist organization, is disarmed and dismantled. That will be a good time.
Okay, let me give the final word to the Palestinian on the panel, which is you, Omar.
Look, we have to stop this pretense that Israel is engaging in accidental violence in which Palestinian civilians are killed. Every major human rights organization in the world, including, by the way, Israeli human rights organizations, document that the Israeli military is engaging in indiscriminate violence against civilians. And that is why the International Court of Justice has found that there is actually a plausible case for Israel being engaged in genocidal violence in Gaza. And that should tell you something. And we have to stop pretending that you can kill this many people on accident. And just one issue with something that you mentioned, Piers, I don't think this is a question of proportionality. We have to be clear about what Israel is doing here. This is not an act of self-defense, because an occupier can never, in principle, be defending themselves against the people they're occupying. If we are serious, once again, what Israel is doing in Gaza, if they wanted self-defense.
There were zero Israelis in Gaza on October 6th. Zero.
Inside, but they controlled Gaza. They bombed it at will whenever they wanted to, and they prevented Palestinians in Gaza from going in and out.
You never mentioned Egypt. No responsibility for Egypt. Everything is always Israel's fault.
Emily, the problem with that argument is this, is that when it wanted to, at the start of this war, Israel had the power and capability to turn off the energy into Gaza, to turn off the internet, to turn off the water, to turn off the food supply. That is a form of occupation, even if you're not physically inside Gaza.
That's actually false.
What
That's
Israel
actually
is
false.
defending
Israel
is a
wasn't
system
able
of
to turn
dominance
off all
over
of the water. Yes, it
Palestinians.
is. They only control 30%
Not
of the
all
water.
of it, but
They
it was
only
able to
control
turn it off for a
10%
lot
of
of
the
people.
electricity.
I don't think Israel should have that power over any Palestinians.
If Israel was
And I
interested
don't think
in
that a
self-defense,
terrorist
it would end the
organization should be ruling
occupation
Palestinians
over
either.
I don't think that. I agree with you about
Organization
that.
is ruling Israel.
I
What's
agree
wrong
with you.
it?
I agree with you on that point,
Organization
Emily.
with nuclear powers ruling Israel.
Okay, listen. I've got to bring it. I've got to bring it to an end.
Israel.
It was a good debate. Thank you.
comment.
I've got to leave it there. I'm sorry. We've run out of time. We've gone longer than I was expecting to. I appreciate the passion on all sides. I hope we can get to a point where this ends and people stop dying. I think we can all agree with that. So thank you, all of you, for joining me. I appreciate it. Uncensored next, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's in hot water for what's been called a transphobic joke